And I must say that I'm very impressed with this campus. And I'm very impressed with, I like the culture as I found it then. And I think that the successors of the people who were then here have made it better. And they've created all this huge success while the civilization 60 miles away was sinking into a swamp and of difficulty. Not its fault, by the way. I think that was just the fate. But Michigan is just amazing. You go into the University Hospital of Michigan, and somebody makes a mistake, nurse, doctor, anything. There's nobody trying to avoid blame for the mistake. They come to the patient and say, gee, you came in for a simple procedure, and we screwed up and you got a pretty bad result. And we're terribly sorry, and we want to make amends. You know what percentage of the hospitals in the United States handle their malpractice responsibilities the way the University of Michigan Hospital does? It's a tiny percent. I'm chairman of a big hospital. In my hospital, the insurer for the doctor and the insurer of the hospital are trying to blame the other one. In Michigan, they just admit they screwed up, and first thing they want to do is make a fair adjustment with the patient, and then thereafter they look as to how to prevent the next one without a lot of recrimination. Now, isn't that a wonderful system? Who wouldn't be proud of being part of a culture like that, which is not the standard culture of the world, the culture of the University of Michigan University Hospital. So there's a lot that's good here. And so I feel very good about coming back, particularly after I've just visited Wall Street or some other place which is different. You know, it's hard to tell stories about Wall Street that sound like my story about the University of Michigan Hospital. They value a different thing there. They're more interested in financial gain. Yeah.
I'd like to open this up a little bit and get some questions from some of you as well. And I have seen a few hands that have already gone up. I see one right here. I know we have some microphones in the room, so if you'll just wait for 1 second. And right here, gentleman in the green shirt, if you just raise your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie, a lot of the problems that we've been discussing so far, from Wall Street to these bigger long-term energy initiatives and politics even, are rooted in the fact that our country's set up on a short-term incentive system. Managers are always looking at what their earnings are going to be next quarter at the top of companies. Politicians are always looking at what the next political point is going to score and then setting programs to develop well past their term in office. How do you propose to get past that and to shift our system from these short-term incentives and planning to a more long-term perspective, not just in our focus, but in how we act as well?
Well, of course we have a terrible problem with these very short-term incentives. And if you combine short-term incentives with very little moral reticence, of course you have a problem. And it's hard to fix human systems without fixing human incentives. So you're absolutely right to focus on the incentives. And I think the existing system, as it's evolved, is quite perverse. A system is perverse when good people go bad because of the way the system is structured. If you run a big chain of stores and you make it easy to steal by your own sloppiness, you will cause a lot of good people to go bad. You will have created an irresponsible system. And a system with these irresponsible incentives, of course, is geared to cause trouble, and you point out that it does and has. If I were the benevolent despot, I would change the whole system. But nobody's going to do it Munger style. And young people are going to have to live in it the way it is and attack it piece by piece. But you were right, that is a very serious problem, both for the politicians and for the executives and everything else. I don't think it is required because the rest of the world cares terribly about the next quarter's earnings. Berkshire doesn't care. So it isn't everybody that cares. Now you can say we carefully structured our system and our lives so that we didn't have to be under crazy incentives. I do not trust myself well enough, and I behave better than most, to have a lot of perverse incentives on myself to do bad things. Much better to set yourself up so that the temptations are low. And so, yes, we should structure the system differently. I don't think it works at all to pay the directors a lot of money and write a big long thing like Sarbanes-Oxley. The more you pay the directors, the more they'll pay the CEO. The ordinary rules of social psychology require that result.
And at Berkshire, you pay directors nothing?
Practically nothing, right? Because we don't like the culture. So it's our quiet form of rebellion. We say, we've examined your procedures and everybody's out of step but Charlie. It's like the old story about the man who's out in the freeway and the wife looks and she says, oh my God. And she calls him on the cell phone and she says, oh, it's terrible. There's a car going the wrong way on the freeway. And the guy answers, a car, he says, there are thousands of them. Well, at any rate, everybody's out of step with Charlie. But I think we should change all these incentives. But I don't think the nostrums that we're using are going to change things enough to put in your eye.
The idea that you are not near Wall Street, Berkshire's offices are not near Wall Street, does that make a difference? Is it easier to operate on your own manner if you're not as near your competitors?
Well, we like to think that being Middle Western boys, we had a better culture, but that may be a conceit. I do think if you get in a crazy place with a lot of competition and a lot of perverse incentives, it's hard to keep your own sanity. My father used to tell a story on himself, which was a very good story that I never forgotten. He was a graduate of the Harvard Law School and practicing law in Nebraska, and he went up to shoot pheasants in South Dakota. And everybody he was with was signing up as a South Dakota resident to save $5 on the hunting license. But the crowd, everybody was doing it, and it was $5 a lot of money back then. And he said he almost signed the damn thing. And I said, my God, this is some kind of perjury, and I'm a practicing lawyer. And he stopped himself. But he came close. So when the culture starts to go wrong, we're all susceptible to be dragged along. And therefore, it's a very good habit in life to develop what Kipling, to keep your head when all about you are losing theirs. It's not, I've been doing it all my life. Everybody's wrong but Charlie. It's caused me some trouble. But it's also created a lot of huge advantage. And it's not that bad averaged out. And the trouble you avoid, think of the people that went along with Enron and committed suicide and got disgraced. And I think that this whole business of if you avoid it yourself, you try and seek out the right places to work, you're very unlikely to go south in what's important in life. If you work in the University of Michigan hospital, that's likely to work. You don't have to go all the way to the slums of India helping Mother Teresa. You have a more convenient place right here where there's not a lot of crazy temptation. But if you go to a place where everybody is stark raving mad and pushing and crazy, and it's very hard to not get sucked along, as my father was almost sucked along into signing some kind of perjured application for a hunting license in South Dakota. We can all drift into that stuff, but we don't watch it. I think I have seen 2 college presidents in my life go down from too much laxity in the expense accounts. I've seen quite a few ministers go down from various miscreancies. And we're all subject to this stuff. It's easy to drift in the wrong direction. And I have a rule in life, which is adopted from going down a river with big whirlpools. When there's a big whirlpool, you don't want to come within 20 feet and just make sure you can barely miss it. You want to go around by 500 yards or something. And so I think this stuff where the culture is crazy, you don't have to enter. And if you find you've accidentally entered, you can leave. But even better than that, if you're shrewd, you can see where the culture is not going to tempt you. Where you're working with people you admire and the values are sound and it's fun to do. And by and large, you can worm your way into that place. And I will give you a tip as to how to do that. And the first decent matter I brought in as a piece of legal work as a young lawyer was for a guy who had been fired by a bunch of venture capitalists, and I got him rehired and we bought the company. And it was a huge success. And I never heard from them. They were glad to do it, but they were busy. And so one day I said, well, I'm being too damn shy. And I just about to enter the freeway in Pasadena, I made a U-turn. I went back and I walked in and I said, well, I really like working for you guys, and just the kind of people I like to be associated with and I like to work for. And sure enough, they had another big problem that I could solve. But if you figure out the people you really want to be with and work for, and you tell them so and why, it is likely to cause a favorable result. Anyway.
Do we have other questions as well? I see a hand right here.
What happened to the accounting profession and what can be done
For those sitting in the back of the room, the question is, what happened to the accounting profession and what can be done to try and fix it?
Well, partly they sold out. Partly they legitimately fear the liabilities that would come if they had to make more difficult judgments. It's a very, very difficult problem. It could be done by changing laws and rules very easily. And it would cause an enormous upheaval in America, which would be hugely to the plus. 99% of the troubles that threaten our civilization come from too optimistic accounting. And yet these damn accountants, with their desire for mathematical purity, want to devote exactly as much attention to accounting that's too pessimistic as they devote to accounting that's too optimistic, which is crazy. Way more than 99% of the problem is from being too optimistic. And therefore, we should have a system where the accounting is way more conservative, and where an accountant at the SEC, when Skilling came in with his crazy scheme for mark-to-market accounting, I don't call it mark-to-market, I call it mark-to-myth. And that accounting was blessed by an accounting firm which perished and deserved to. And so, but that's another subject. That's something I'll be 87 years old in January, if I make it, and you're going to have to fix the accounting. I'm like Moses, I'm pointing the way, and you guys you guys have to do the fixing. Yeah.
I see a question right here.
Yeah.
There's a microphone right behind you.
Much easier. Given that you think the system is still rapidly rather broken, your outlook for the unemployment is still rather dire, and given the last 10 years of returns and what we've seen, would you recommend someone who's young to put their limited savings into the market, even given the long-term time horizon?
Well, long term, I'd rather own common stocks I pick than government bonds at the present rates. So that's an easy question for me. What you should do with your own life depends on your own opportunity cost, how likely it is you're going to need the money suddenly at an inconvenient time, and a lot of other subjects. generally speaking, I would say that in the last, look what happened in the last 100 years. Well, say the 20th century, 1900 to 2000. GDP per capita, hard to measure, because what's it worth to have your children live instead of die because of vaccines against diphtheria and so on and so on. I mean, but the net increases in living standards and in human options between 1900 and 2000 were simply awesome. When you take the big picture view instead of the short picture view, think what came. Widely distributed electric power, television and radio, the ability to get in your own car, move around where you wanted, cheap travel by jet all over the world, air conditioning in places that are unendurable in the summer, widely distributed information. It's just unbelievable what happened. In no previous 100 years did anything remotely comparable happen. Are all those forces gone? I don't think the next 100 years is going to do as much, because those are such huge achievements given human needs. Once you got the right temperature and the right usage, you're getting into frou-frou when you get into the improvements from that point. But do I think there will be more improvements and more options? Yes. Do more tragedies? Big tragedies. Big death rates occasionally. I think the next 100 years is going to be very interesting for some of you people. But I think it's a good time to be alive. I think there's a lot of good that will happen. And when you look at this enormous big picture gain in longevity and behavior, the liberty for people in the underclass, more liberty for whole sex, half the population. It was just incredible what happened. So I think to look back on that in a big picture way and be terribly discouraged is to sort of underestimate your species and your civilization. Even suppose there's a 25% death rate. It'll be a big deal if it affects you or your family, but apart from that, the Black Death was good for the survivors. In other words, I don't think it's a time to be at all discouraged. Yeah.
I see another question right here, and I think we can get the microphone. By the way, right here's a microphone. Would you just tell us what year you are, maybe? Which school you're in?
Sure, I'm a 2L at the law school. And my question is, you suggested that you're pointing, but that it's our problem to solve. And I was curious, I've read a number of recent editorials that have suggested that our generation, my generation, is not up to the challenge, that we've invested and sent our smartest people to Wall Street and to law school instead of investing in math and science. And I'm just curious if you think my generation, our generation, is up to the challenge.
Well, I think your generation will be up to handling a lot of the challenge. Now, more of the people who handle the challenge may look like Lilu than look like you. In other words, the mix may change. I think we're getting more Asian contribution to solutions than we had in my generation. But your generation will be up to it. And the talent that comes along, I love to tell a story about Caltech. Caltech has a Rubik's Cube contest. And one year, a guy won it. He asked for 3 cubes, and he juggled them like this. And as they went by in his hands while he was juggling, he solved all 3. And people thought that was a hell of an achievement that would be hard to top. And the next year along came a slender young woman, and she said, "Give me 2 Rubik's Cubes." And she just held them in front of her and looked at them for a long, long, long time. Then she put one in her left hand, one in her right, and put both hands behind her back and twiddled and took them out solved. Nobody has topped that yet. So there's a lot of competition in your generation, but it's only gone that far. If you can handle that much, why,
Do we have other questions? I see hands. How about right here? And again, if you can just tell us your year and what school you're in.
I'm a BBA sophomore. And Charlie, you have talked about high tides and low tides in the very beginning. And we are now in the low tides, and the government and the Fed have used, well, their weapons really aggressively. So what would prevent us from getting into a stagnation that Japan faced in the last 10, 15 years? And would it be a good idea to not to hold stocks, but to hold more gold or other commodities? And what do you think about that? Thanks.
Well, what I think is I can't follow it. There was a little echo or something.
Oh, he was asking about, you mentioned the high tide, the low tide. Where are we right now? Would it be a better idea to jump into equities at this point or something like gold, which, by the way, hit a record high today?
Oh, I don't have the slightest interest in gold.
And
I like working on understanding what works and what doesn't in human systems. To me, that's not optional. That's a moral obligation. If you're capable of understanding the world, you have a moral obligation to become rational. And I don't see how you become rational hoarding gold. Even if it works, you're a jerk. So I advise you to get concerned with equities.
let me rephrase the first part of my question. Would the United States follow the path of Japan in the last 10 or 15 years, with a long term of almost zero economic growth?
Well, the answer to that is, of course we could. It's like the man said about baptism. I believe in it because I've seen it done. Japan has proved that an advanced nation can have a long period of utter stasis following a bust. Now, are we going to be like Japan? Or are we going to do better? I think we're going to do better. But I don't think if we have trouble, I don't think we'll handle it as well as Japan. Japan is a very courteous, submissive, amazing place. If they were going to have a long period of stasis, you could hardly find people who would handle it better if you selected over the whole earth. They have the right behavioral ethos to. Here, I think we'd have a lot more tension if we had a long period of no growth at all. And so I hope we aren't in for that. But if we did have it, in the big scheme of things, is that a tragedy? At the current living standards of the United States, would it be a tragedy if we held level for a considerable period? Well, by the big time scale of human tragedy, that is not way worse threatens. But yes, could that happen? Of course it could happen. It did happen. And remember, Japan paid every fiscal trick known to man and every Keynesian trick known to man. And when it was all done, they got 20 years of stasis. Now it's a different place, different system. We're different. It doesn't mean you can, but is it conceivable? Of course it's conceivable. It's conceivable because it happened.
All right, other questions? How about we go here and then here? Right here in the front row first.
I'm not currently a student, but I am a Berkshire shareholder and West Coast shareholder. So it's nice having you here in Michigan. It's always great to be out in Pasadena, seeing you as well.
I mean, the groupies have followed me here. I thought it was kind of an old group.
My question, as it relates to the economy and as it relates to some of the issues, longer-term issues, we obviously have significant pension liabilities and significant healthcare liabilities, but more so to the pension liabilities. How do we go about trying to fix them? And how, given how underfunded a lot of municipalities are, how do we even come close?
Well, of course, it's a terrible problem. And of course, there was some deep moral and behavioral failure. Those plans were abused by various manipulative tricks where people got very unfairly high pensions. And of course, that's what human nature does. You make it easy to steal, people will steal. And that's what it amounts to when somebody gets $600,000 a year from some poor community full of Latinos with low employment. A man in those circumstances is stealing. We don't call it stealing because he hires lawyers, but he's stealing. And of course that's a big problem, and it happens all over. And of course the unfunded liabilities. They talk about our national debt as a percentage of GDP. The unfunded liabilities of the United States for medical care and pensions in terms of present value are far greater than the national debt that we report. So if we get into a Japan-type situation with no growth, we're in for a hell of a lot of social tensions. But isn't that wonderful for you young people? You get all these interesting problems to live through. But of course it's a serious problem. I personally would not touch Social Security in terms of its present promises. I think net that's been a credit to our civilization. And it's worked with low administrative costs and low fraud, and it's given a lot of people their main dignity in old age. And I think as long as we're as rich as we are, we should find a way to afford it. And I don't think the world comes to an end if we end up supporting Social Security promises with a value-added tax. Personally, I don't expect to live to see a value-added tax because I'm so old. But I think it's a very desirable tax. It subsidizes exports, which of course we need with a big balance of payments deficit. And that's the one legitimate way that's permissible to subsidize exports, is to have a value-added tax which exempts export. That's what everybody else has. We have a disadvantage now in terms of trade because of not having a value-added tax.
It's a regressive tax, though, and you said you wouldn't mind if your taxes were higher.
Well, I don't know how regressive it is if you
use more of, if you're a low-income person, you probably use more of your earnings. You're forced to spend more of your earnings to take care of yourself.
No, but there can be exemptions and credits and so forth, or maybe the low-income people pay only the value-added tax, and the other people pay a value-added tax plus an income tax. But there's some different way of organizing the tax system, and so I don't think in a modern democratic civilization that it's feasible to do a lot to tweak Social Security way the hell down. I don't think anybody's going to stand for it, and I don't think it would be a good idea.
Would you be okay if they slowly, if they gradually and slowly raise the retirement age? Would that be okay?
Well, reasonable minds could disagree. I personally wouldn't do it. I would leave the basic Social Security alone and deal with all the rest of the things. We got so much trouble in all the rest, and it's so large, and the unfunded promises are so great, and there's so much misbehavior that to take on the political ill will from tinkering with some guy who's only got 3 years to live anyway and take away $30 a month, I just don't want to do it. To me, it's a stupid allocation of goodwill and time. And no, I would save my effort for what really matters. And of course, we're going to have to tackle the unfunded promises, and I think we're going to have to change our system of taxation. Basically, I lived through the period of 90% income taxes and the crooked, lying tax shelter salesmen and all. I hated it. We do not want that back. I think a 50% tax, if a guy's a busy surgeon, is plenty for the man to pay. I don't care how much he's making. So I think the existing income tax rates are pretty close to right when you put the state and federal taxes together. On earned income, I do think that we went way too far in favoring people who manage hedge funds. I mean, the idea that, and by the way, they don't just get a 15% tax. They play tricks with foreign. They have all kind. The tax of our successful one-income class is really trivial, and I don't see any reason why it should be tolerated. I think it's unfair, and the man who said, "Are you dissatisfied to have all these math and science people going into derivative trading?" Of course, I'm disappointed. I have a letter I just got this week. The guy has all these advanced degrees in computer science and math and so forth. He works for a hedge fund, and he has 300 million long and